Hi there, welcome back. My name is Sheldon MacLeod. This is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here exclusively by the Saltwire Network. And I've talked a lot about politics in this space over the last year or so since I've been doing this. And a few things of note. I didn't know until just a few years ago that it was in 1961 that Nova Scotia elected its first woman MLA. The first woman was Gladys Muriel Porter, and that was in 1961. And then we all heard with the passing of Alexa McDonough recently that she was the first Nova Scotia party leader, first woman to lead a political party in this province. And that was in 1980. And of course, there were stories as well about how there wasn't even a dedicated washroom for women at that time in 1980. It seems like a long, long time ago. And just recently, the Nova Scotia legislature introduced a portrait to the gallery. Yvonne Atwell, who was elected in 1998. That marked an important milestone in the representation of women of color in Nova Scotia's democratic institution. I'm reading from some of the notes that were presented by the Speaker of the House on that day just about a month ago. Well, it's February 22nd, I guess it was. And the reason for me and for this information right now is I received a request about a conversation that Robert Wright wanted to have. And it really has to do with where we are in process. As we know, Nova Scotia's Liberal Party is looking for a new leader, and so is the new Democratic Party. And I guess the question is Nova Scotia ready for a black woman to lead a political party? And Robert Wright is here with me now. Robert, good day to you, sir.
Good morning, Sheldon.
You are a social worker by trade. I've never asked you, I know you've been political, but not in a very partisan way. I'm just curious where this is coming from, this idea, this conversation, this need you have for this conversation today.
Well, I'm certainly a person who's well known for speaking about social issues and political issues and policy issues. But no, I haven't been political in a partisan way. I've always said that I would freely give any advice on policy or governance to any political person, policy person, government official, but I've never really been partisan. But I think that this conversation has come to me with some urgency because with Angela Simmonds' bid for the leadership of the Liberal Party, I've been hearing people ask the question out loud, is Nova Scotia ready for a black woman to be the leader of a party and to be the premier? And I've just been aghast at the question. And I said, well, someone needs to talk about this out loud. So I called you.
No, and I'm thankful for that. And the idea that people would say, and I know in the past that I've had questions for folks and I've not phrased them in a way that was respectful and unintentional. And I'm very glad that people were willing to tell me, okay, this is why that question, there's a problem with it. Robert, what's wrong with saying or asking the question, are Nova Scotians ready for a black political leader, a woman?
Well, I guess I would say is that the question seems to misunderstand where we are in the history of Nova Scotia. For the last 25 years or so, I've been working in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion, DEI, EDI. And I've been doing this work largely in legal settings, so law firms. I'm actively involved in the law school supporting the IB&M program there. I've worked in education and community service, and I've worked for other governments. We need to recognize that Nova Scotia, like the rest of Canada and North America, that the diversity that exists here is now emerging as a central component of our society and our nature. We have always been diverse. Indigenous people, people of African descent, people of European descent, Lebanese immigrants have been here in this province for a very, very long time. Nova Scotia has always been diverse. And now those people who represent those diversities are emerging as the leaders of our society and economy. If you think about who are the small business owners in Nova Scotia today, where is the new energy for the next evolution of Nova Scotian society coming from? It's coming from people who are diverse, people who have not been in leadership previously. And if Nova Scotia isn't ready for that kind of leadership, then Nova Scotia is not ready for a sustainable future.
One of the things that came to me early on in interacting with people is this idea that, you know, when you're talking of someone who's seen as a visible minority in a population, to say, is it fair that you will be seen as a representative for an entire group of people who look like you? And when you turn that on its head, you look at what politics is in Nova Scotia and Canada and the world, and there's no one who says that that person who looks like me represents me for anything other than the values that I cherish and hope for and strive and strive towards. So I can understand why that's seen as a question that has legitimacy, but again, it kind of ignores the fact that we all disagree with the politicians we elect, no matter what they look like at some point. So how do we move people past that barrier, or that perhaps blindness to what they're actually asking about when they say that?
Well, I think we need to turn the question on its head, and we need to ask the question: have white men been able to represent everybody in the province up until now, with the great diversity that we have in this province? Well, they have had to be able to represent women. They've had to be able to represent Indigenous or Mi'kmaq persons. They've had to be able to represent Black people. They've had to be able to represent recent immigrants. They've had to be able to do that. Sadly, I think the record would show that that kind of leadership has not done that well. And as a result, people who represent a diversity, not just ethnic diversities, but we can think about LGBTQ2SIA individuals, queer folk in Nova Scotia, we have not been represented well by that historical legacy of leadership of white men. And I think that that's something we need to think about going into the future. Let's just take one issue, for example. Let's take the issue of healthcare. Now, without naming the community, I'll say that I lived in rural Nova Scotia for 9 years. And I was fortunate enough to have a family physician. But in the 9 years that I was there, I had 4 family physicians. And each one of them was a racialized individual who was an internationally trained physician who came to Nova Scotia to live and practice. And each one of them left Nova Scotia after a short period of time because they found Nova Scotia not to be a welcoming and inclusive place for them. So if we're going to address the healthcare challenges in Nova Scotia, we're going to have an infrastructure in Nova Scotia that knows how to welcome and include into our society racialized and immigrant and Indigenous and Black individuals who are necessary for us to build the Nova Scotia of the future. And if Nova Scotia is not ready for a Black woman leader, then Nova Scotia is not ready to welcome the Nova Scotians into leadership in other sectors, like in healthcare, like in education, like in industry, like in energy, that we will need in order to get into the future of Nova Scotia. And those people who say we're not ready are perhaps speaking out of fear, perhaps out of an old sentiment of an inability to acknowledge the skills and leaderships of racialized and Indigenous and other diverse Nova Scotians. And if we're stuck kind of juggling that question, then perhaps what we're saying is Nova Scotia isn't ready for the future. And I think that that's a dangerous sentiment to be casually bantering around.
Is there a possibility that some of that fear, or that's the wrong word, some of that perceived apprehension is because people realize that racism is still real, that systemic racism is still a part of our processes?
Well, I think that that's what they are saying. But I think instead of asking, are we ready to have a Black woman lead a political party and potentially lead the province, we should be asking ourselves the question, how do we get ready for that? What is the dialogue that we need to have? What is the dialogue we need to have from Yarmouth to Meat Cove to remind us collectively as Nova Scotians of what the future of Nova Scotia is and must look like? We've watched over the last number of years, we've watched an erosion of rural Nova Scotia. We've seen rural municipalities give up their charter and have to merge because the economy in rural Nova Scotia has been eroding. The population in rural Nova Scotia has been eroding. If we do not break with these old ideas and become inclusive and welcoming in every corner of Nova Scotia to new Nova Scotians, we are going to see a continuation of that erosion. And that's not the future of Nova Scotia that anyone wants. I think we need to accept that the future of Nova Scotia is an inclusive and diverse society where people who represent diversity are welcome and an integral part of our society in every corner of this province.
And we started this conversation talking about partisanship. Are the parties ready? Do you feel that those institutions, the long-standing institutions of political parties in Nova Scotia, have the willingness and the ability to see through and see what you're saying today?
Well, again, now you're pulling me into a partisan conversation. What I would say about that is this. If we just look at the record of political parties in Nova Scotia, the New Democratic Party and the Liberal Party have been the parties that have been successful in recruiting and electing members of the legislature who are represented diversity, who are Black. Let's just talk about that particularly. In fact, today we have the largest number of Black MLAs to ever sit in the legislature at one time, and they are in the New Democratic Party and in the Liberal Party. It is telling that the Nova Scotia Conservative Party has never been able to elect a Black person to the legislature from their party. And so it begs the question, if that party is ready, if those individuals in Nova Scotia who support that party are aligned to the kind of future vision of Nova Scotia that I've described. From Yarmouth to Meat Cove, are people who are connected to the Conservative Party of Nova Scotia able to catch this vision such that they are able to nominate, get behind, and elect a Black or other diverse candidate in a riding that historically has been a conservative stronghold? I would say that a party that is not able in 2022 to elect a Black member to the legislature is a party that is demonstrating that it has work to do if it wants to be the party to lead us into the future of Nova Scotia. Now that sounds awfully partisan, but I speak as an observer of.
No, and truly, the Progressive Conservative Party in Nova Scotia did say they had a diverse cast, a diverse line of candidates. It was as we found out with trying to name a member, a cabinet minister to African Nova Scotian Affairs, they said, well, it was Nova Scotians who did not elect. So your point is bang on. It was the party members, the people who support the party, not necessarily the party itself.
And I don't really accept the argument that, well, Nova Scotians didn't elect the person. We all know Nova Scotia politics, and we know that there are ridings in this province where that are Liberal ridings, that are Conservative ridings, that if those parties chose to run an aging goat in that riding, they would elect a person to that goat to the legislature. So it's telling that that the Conservative Party was not able to nominate a Black person, or chose not to nominate a Black person in a riding where they would almost certainly elect that member. And is that a strategic failure, or is that representative of what's happening in that party? I guess I will allow Conservatives, people, to ask and answer that question, but certainly it's something that I would be confident that there are Conservatives scratching their heads now and saying, how do we go into the next election confident that we're not going to have this problem in the next legislature?
So just so I have it right, it's not the question, it's the question we should be asking ourselves as to why that's even an issue.
Mm-hmm. Why haven't we done it yet? What are we doing to make it happen? What are we doing to elect people who represent diversity to our legislature in order to carry Nova Scotia into the future? And the future of Nova Scotia is diversity. The future of Nova Scotia is women in leadership. The future of Nova Scotia is brown people leading the economy and our institutions in every corner of the province. That's the future of Nova Scotia. And if we're asking the question, are we ready for a Black woman leader? We're suggesting that we're not ready for the future.
Robert Wright, don't be surprised if a political party comes asking for you to run for them, if they haven't already. Thank you so much for weighing in and offering this opportunity for me to learn and to have this conversation, sir.
You're very welcome, Sheldon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk out loud about these issues.